So I spent the month of April in the Masai Mara in Kenya, and I would love to tell you a little about my time there. So we'll go to the first slide. This is a little geography lesson, which I needed going there because I landed and realized I had no idea where we actually were. So Kenya is in East Africa, and it straddles the equator there. And the arrows on the small map are where we spent our time. So that blue arrow is where we landed in Nairobi, that dark blue right in the middle there. And then we took about a 5-hour trip west to the Masai Mara National Reserve, which is where our camp was and where the hospitals were, where we were staying. And then we spent our last week on the eastern coast, that far right arrow near Mombasa at the beach. So nothing medical about that side. So a little bit about Kenya, the country. About 48 million people live there. They've had a lot of rapid population growth recently, which has caused some of the problems that we'll talk about. They were a British colony from 1895 until 1963, and the colonization also led to a lot of the problems there. Women actually had a lot more rights before the colonizers came in and took all the land away, which women had owned. But they gained independence in 1963, and they're a democracy now. Their official languages are Swahili and English. Swahili is actually a trading language that has a lot of Arabic and French and English influences. As traders came to East Africa and were trying to trade, and they worked out this language that was sort of a combination of their languages and the native African languages. So pretty much everybody speaks Swahili. English is the official language used in government and school and healthcare. And that's something you learn later in school, so some people are fluent and some are not. There are 42 tribes there, and each tribe has their own tribal dialect. So most people in Kenya are trilingual, knowing their tribal language, Swahili and English. Major religions, Christianity and Islam. Islam is more prominent on that eastern coast where the Arab traders came into. There's about a 53% poverty rate. Only 58% of people have access to a clean drinking water supply, and only about 20% of that is indoor plumbing. Although that varies, the urban areas tend to have more access to electricity and plumbing than the rural areas where we were. Literacy rate is about 85%. In 2003, the government instituted mandatory primary education. So all kids should be in primary school, and it should be free for them. Secondary school, the government is working on making that free, so the equivalent of our high school. So the group that I was working with was called WE, and they have sort of a threefold mission. So the WE Charity was the group that I was officially working as part of, and they create what are called WE villages, and they have several locations that I'll talk about around the world, where they work in a village to work on water access, education, healthcare, and they work with the local people there to make it sustainable in the long term. There's also Me to We, which you may have seen their products in stores. This is more of a social enterprise where they have people in their local areas creating beading, like the Maasai people that we worked with, or local handicrafts that are then sold around the world to help fund the We Charity. And then We Day, which is a conference for middle schoolers and high schoolers to encourage them to go out and change the world. So these, in addition to Kenya, are the other countries where the We Charity establishes their We villages. So several in South America, rural China, and India, and a couple other countries in Africa. And these are WE's 5 pillars that they work on in their communities. So they start with water access. Oftentimes there is no water nearby, so it's usually the women's and girls' job to go fetch water, which can be several hours a day. So they start with this so that the people can be healthier and have clean water and not spend so much time getting water, so that they can start working on these other pillars. They work on education. They've established primary and secondary schools. There's also a college across the street from the hospital that WE has worked on. They work on health, establishing hospitals, health centers, pharmacies, as well as community health workers. Opportunity, they work on empowering women and the local people to improve their agriculture practices, to have a larger market for their goods, and then food, improving farming practices. We also got to visit an organic farm that supplied the girls' school and the camp where we were, so we had amazing food. This is where I was staying in the Bogani camp. So we stayed in permanent tents, which were actually pretty nice. That's my bed inside the tent there. So each tent had 2 beds, and we actually had indoor plumbing and hot water that they made by literally lighting a fire under the hot water tank.
Did you have to have mosquito netting?
Our tents were enclosed, so we didn't have mosquito nets on our beds, but we gave out mosquito nets to a lot of families to help prevent malaria. So what mostly struck me about Kenya for the first 2 weeks I was there was just how beautiful everything was. And everybody kept asking me what my impressions were, and it was just that the landscapes were stunning. So that first picture there is the Great Rift Valley, which stretches across a large portion of the African continent. And down in the valley is where a lot of the Maasai people live. This is just right next door to our camp. We went on early morning hikes, and you could see zebras just walking around. I never saw a single horse where we were there, but I saw so many zebras just out in the wild. This is on one of our drives to or from the hospital, and you can see the mountains in the background and the storms. It was the rainy season, so we'd usually get a big thunderstorm around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like clockwork. And the weather was it wasn't crazy hot. It was usually about mid-70s during the day, and it got down to mid-50s at night, so we were mostly surprised by how chilly we were in the evenings. This is out on our safari, one of the savannas. Those are acacia trees, those kind of classic flat-topped savanna trees. So I'll talk a little bit about the healthcare work that we did there. Some of the major health concerns nationally in Kenya are malaria, HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, and other big killers of children are pneumonia, diarrhea. There's also problems with malnutrition and with traffic accidents, actually. Kenya has the highest rate of traffic accidents in the world of any country. There's also a problem with infant mortality. So one of our healthcare goals is to increase how many births are attended by a skilled provider. Whether they come to the hospital or they have the birth at home, that there's someone skilled who knows what to do if there are problems. Common concerns that we saw a lot in our hospitals. First of all, just your run-of-the-mill. So many people came in with colds, with minor injuries, wanting work excuses for their pinky injury, just like in the US. So lots of respiratory infections. We also saw a lot of skin conditions, and actually a group of dermatologists was coming to the hospital a couple weeks after us, thankfully, because a lot of the times we were limited to, there's something wrong with your skin. We also saw some typhoid brucellosis, which is an infection that is caused by drinking raw milk, since there's a lot of livestock herding in the area. And then we provided a lot of prenatal care, just childhood vaccinations, and we cared for a lot of people with chronic conditions, same as here, people with diabetes coming in for their follow-up or COPD. The health system there is structured in many layers, and it's actually an interesting system that I think the US would do well to emulate. So at the first level are community health workers that are just out in the community surveying for problems, making sure that families come in for their visits, checking up on people. Then there are dispensaries, which are kind of pharmacies that are staffed by nurses and provide regular outpatient services, like cold and flu, minor injuries. The next level up is health centers, which are staffed by clinical officers, which are similar to physician assistants here. And they may have some doctors there too. And those will usually have an inpatient hospital unit and then have some laboratory and pharmacy services too. And then as people have bigger problems, they're referred further up the chain, up to district hospitals, which are staffed by doctors and can offer surgery. And then up to the top level, which would be county hospitals. There are 47 counties in Kenya, and then even up to the national hospitals, of which there are 3 for the highest levels of care. So I spent my time at 2 different health centers that were run by the WE organization. The first was Baraka Hospital, and Baraka means blessing in Swahili. So they offered outpatient consultations, just regular doctor visits. They had labor and delivery services, and they could do C-sections as well. They had an emergency room, they had a small inpatient hospital, they had a surgical theater, although no surgeon while we were there. So often staffing is the limiting factor. So they had a US surgeon that was coming in a couple weeks, and they were letting people know that if they had problems to come at that time. They had just opened radiology, so they had an x-ray machine and an ultrasound tech. They had laboratory services, and I took a picture of the laboratory prices because I couldn't believe how low they were. I didn't put the picture here, but at most you would pay $4 for one of your labs. And then pharmacy services as well. And patients received their medications at wholesale cost. which makes me think about how much they're marked up here, because again, maybe $4 would be the maximum you'd pay. I had to pick up a prescription there because I was sick, and I said, oh, I can pay you for it. And they're like, well, it's like 50 cents, but if you want to. So these are a couple of the things that we spend most of our days doing. The first on the left is Gabriella, one of our team members, just seeing a child in an outpatient consultation. On the right is Nada preparing a vaccination. So every week there were child vaccine clinics where parents could bring their kids in for their scheduled vaccines. They were much better about it than American families are. And then this is the radiology tech on the left who's doing an ultrasound on a little kid there. And then on the right is their laboratory, where we could do a lot of basic testing. On the left is the operating theater. This was preparing for a C-section. So that's Mary, the anesthetist, and they had a full surgical theater very similar to what you would see here. The only problem was that the power kept going out. So they kept calling the person to turn on the generator, and we had our cell phone cameras. And then the baby on the right side from the C-section. The second was Kishan Health Center, which was a smaller health center, but it offered some specialty services. So like Baraka, and Kishan means blessing in the Maasai language. They offered outpatient consultations, which was what we spent most of our time doing, just seeing outpatients. They had prenatal care clinics where moms would come in at several points during their pregnancy, and we'd feel for the position of the baby and listen for heartbeat, take their vital signs, take their blood pressure. We give them a tetanus vaccine and give them a bed net if it was their first visit during that pregnancy. They also had a lab and a pharmacy, more limited in what they could provide. But they had some specialty. They had just opened a dialysis center. We saw some of the first dialysis patients there. They had 2 dialysis machines. They had optometry services, and they had a lot of donated glasses, and they also did eye exams. And then they had dentistry. And they just had a dentistry tech there. They weren't able to bring in a dentist most of the times, but the tech did everything the dentist would have done. I saw a tooth pulled, which I never want to see again. And he did fillings and root canals and all those sorts of things. And you can see just how beautiful the gardens outside were, and everything was open to the air. So on the left is the dental suite, which was actually pretty modern. And then on the right is the emergency room, which looks a little bit different from emergency rooms you're probably used to seeing. The bed there and the sink, and that's about it. On the left is Gabriella with the dialysis machine. We learned how to disconnect people from dialysis. They let us try a lot of different things and learn a lot. On the right is Kishan's ambulance. And you're probably thinking, well, why don't they have a real ambulance? And when we go to the next slide, you'll see why we need a pickup truck with a little ambulance attachment there. These were the typical states of the roads. That picture on the left is when we were trying to get back to Nairobi from our camp to catch our flight, and it should have been about a 4-hour trip, and it took 9 hours, about 3 of which were waiting for a tractor to come and drag that truck out of the mud. And then our engine broke down after gunning it through that mud. And then the Maasai people are herders, so there were often a lot of goats and cows on the roads as well, but they were pretty good at getting out of the way for traffic. And then another work that we did was community outreach. So this was one of our community outreach days. This is actually at a local schoolhouse. And families could bring their kids in. Usually we wouldn't announce that we were coming out, but the kids would find us right away and then go back and get their families, and families would come in. So we registered the kids, took their weight, and then we gave them vitamin A, which is a common deficiency, and you can actually just 1 vitamin A capsule every 6 months can take care of you. So we give them their little vitamin A capsule, and we give them a deworming pill to clear out any parasites, and give them any vaccines that they needed to catch up on. And we kept telling these kids, we'd heard the providers say like, tamu sana, which means very delicious, eat this. And so I was saying it to the kids too, and then I decided I should actually try it, so I wasn't lying to them. It was terrible. It was not tamu sana. So eventually I just said, eat this, I'm sorry. So on the left you can see Gabriella registering in the government log books, which they would keep these hard paper logs and then send them to the government every few years for auditing. And then on the right you can see her listening to a pregnant mom. Those were the stethoscopes you use to listen to a fetal heartbeat when you don't have an ultrasound. So I figured you all might want to know about the food. On the left is a goat that we bought for our celebratory last dinner in Kenya. I have to say it was delicious, and I didn't really feel bad. And you can see me wearing there around my shoulders a shuka, which is a traditional Maasai garment, kind of like a blanket tied around your shoulders, and you can wear it all different ways. It used to be a cow skin, but now most of the Maasai wear a fabric one. On the top there is chapati, which is a sort of Indian flatbread, similar to a tortilla. And you know, here, if you slept well, you say, like, I slept like a log, or I slept like a baby. There they say they slept like chapati.
Yeah.
The stew on the bottom is githeri, which is a traditional stew made of beans and maize, or corn. And you see the avocado there. Avocado is a really common crop in Kenya. And you'd go to the market and see these huge piles of giant avocados, and you could buy maybe 10 for $1. And everyone just cracked up when I told them that avocado was kind of a fancy luxury food here. They said, wait, you paid $2 for an avocado? And then on the right is ugali, which is a staple food. It's made of boiled corn flour. You boil off the water and then you get kind of this spongy material that you can eat with stews. Alright, so I know you're all going to want to see the safari pictures. You're like, get on with the health care. We want to see the animals. So we did get to go on a weekend safari in the Masai Mara Reserve. The Masai Mara is the Kenyan part of the Serengeti. Most of the Serengeti is in Tanzania, but a little bit is in Kenya. So here you can see one of the most magnificent things we saw, which was a lioness out hunting. And we saw a lioness with her 2 cubs, and I videotaped them for a while. They were so playful, just like kittens here. You can see that one attacking his mom's leg. And there's the 2 little cubs.
How close were you?
We were in a Land Cruiser vehicle, but we were maybe like 20 feet away. And the lions just went about their business like we weren't even there. Of course, there were tons of vehicles around the lions, of course. This was a giraffe that just crossed the street right in front of us. And we saw quite a few giraffes. These are some just munching on a tree. You see lots of buffalo in the shade under the trees.
So that's a preserve, right? That's not.
It's basically out in the wild. It's kind of what?
There's no hunting there.
No, I mean there is some poaching still, but it's kind of like a national park here. Like there's no fences around it, but there are rules about what you can do there, and there are rangers. There's a zebra and a couple warthogs. They say when their tails are up, they know where they're going, and then they forget where they're going, and their tails go down, and they start wandering again. A couple more zebras. Like I said, these were just all over the place. The first zebras we saw, I took like 100 pictures because I thought we'd never see them again. They're everywhere. These were some buffalo, one of the big 5. If you've heard about the big 5, those were traditionally the 5 animals that were the hardest to hunt on foot. So it was, let me think, buffalo, leopard, elephant, rhino, and something else. So there you can see, those are impalas in the background, and then a baboon up in the foreground. These are Thompson's gazelles, which were really hard to get a picture of because they were very flighty anytime we get close to them. That's a hyena. They look just like they do in The Lion King. An ostrich. I wasn't sure that ostriches were African, but then we saw them running around. So. We also saw a lot of squirrels, which I somehow figured were just an Ohio thing, but Africa has them. This is a wildebeest, and the wildebeest migration goes through the whole Serengeti and then through a bit of the Masai Mara in July and August, and that's a huge tourist time. That was like what killed Mufasa in The Lion King, the stampede of wildebeest. They get a bad rap because of that. We ate our lunch overlooking a river, which was full of hippos, and you should have seen just heard all the splashing and the air poofs, and there were so many hippos. That was fun to see. And I know you've all been waiting for the elephants. So this was the first time we saw a male elephant out on his own. And then later we saw a whole family showing us their most flattering features. And I would be remiss to not note the beach where we spent our last week was closer to paradise than I thought I would ever see in person. Just these beautiful white sand beaches, blue skies, tropical weather. That's not a postcard, that's the view from my beach chair. And there were monkeys everywhere, always trying to steal your stuff. You see that little cup right behind him? That was the cup that I was having my cocktail out of. And then he just stuck his head in there and drank it all. And then was licking the grass for the rest of it. And when we registered for this room, they promised us that the rooms were monkey-proof. And I thought, well, that's a weird thing to advertise until I saw monkeys trying to break into our room. And then our last day in Nairobi, we went to an elephant orphanage, which takes care of and raises baby elephants that have been orphaned. It raises them until about age 3, and then they go back into the wild. So this was an elephant drinking his milk there. And then we went to a giraffe breeding center. This is an endangered type of giraffe called the Reticulated Giraffe, and you could get pellets and feed them, and they were very enthusiastic about that. So if you're interested in supporting this kind of work, there are 2 websites that I recommend to you. So the first is the We Villages website, the We Charity website, which is the organization that I went through, wecharity.org. And you can read more about their missions, you can buy some of the products, or you can make a donation. Or if you want to go to Kenya, they actually take people of all skill sets. You can go over there, they'll host you, and you can work on building one of their schools, or you can work in engineering, or in whatever your skill set is, even if it's just laying bricks on top of each other. You are welcome to serve with them as well. I had a fantastic time. And the one on the right is GiveWell, which is a charity resource that I recommend everybody check out. They use research data to determine which projects worldwide give you the most bang for your buck, the most lives saved for your dollar. So they support some initiatives against malaria, against different parasites, and really rigorously make sure that the projects they recommend you support are worth your time and money. So I will say a Swahili phrase, asante sana, thank you very much. And I have a couple souvenirs that my mom insisted that I show off to you. So. Yes?
So I saw on one of the slides you said that you have diabetes or diabetes. Is that a new problem?
Diabetes is definitely becoming more of a problem recently as more of the Western diet and influences start to make their way over.
Is it as costly as that binge every shots? You have to look at all that too?
Usually it's managed a little more conservatively. You know, in the U.S. we throw everything at a problem all at once. Even people with type 1 diabetes there, here they would tend to get like 3 shots a day with each meal, check their sugars really frequently. There they just get 1 shot of long-lasting insulin all day because they can only really check their blood sugar when they come into the clinic once a week or once every 2 weeks.
They give them diet?
Yeah, they get diet advice, yeah. More vegetables. Same as here. So beading is a very common way of life, especially for the Maasai people. We had a couple Maasai guides that we worked with. So this was a beaded bird of paradise flower that I got in one of the shops there. But we were always being given beaded necklaces and bracelets and all sorts of beautiful beading. And then I got a couple pieces of art as well that are rather large because I can only afford large art in Africa. So this is a painting of a group of Maasai. If you look at it long enough, you can see it's lots of people standing together. Holding their spears and water jugs on their heads. You might know the Maasai from marathon running. That's what their tribe is quite famous for, and a couple of the big marathon winners this year were from the Maasai tribe in Kenya. And then this other is a batik painting. Hold it up to the light, though.
That's gorgeous.
But we have yet to figure out, we're taking ideas on how in the world to mount and frame
Yes.
it.
So this is, they dye the fabric all the bright colors first, and then paint over certain areas in wax, and then dye it black. So the painted over areas in wax stay the colorful colors. Does anybody have any other questions?
And you also got the dress.
Yes, and I got this dress at the market. I think I ended up paying $3 for it. They wanted $4, but that was just too much. You got to bargain it down. That's what they tell you.
So did you use American currency?
Some places would take it. They use Kenyan shillings, but the exchange is 100 shillings to $1, so it's a really easy conversion. Other questions? Medicine, food, clothing, culture, anything?
Tell about the end of your 9-hour trip back to Nairobi, the very fast part.
Oh, yes. So when we were trying to get back to Nairobi from our camp, and first we were stuck behind that big muddy stretch of road with the truck stuck in it, and then our engine overheated, so we stopped at a nice little roadside mechanic for a while, and we got a jug of water and poured water on it continually while we were driving. And then eventually the transmission blew out in the middle of nowhere. So they were trying to get somebody to come from Nairobi to get us, but it would have been too long, we wouldn't have made our flight. So we took a matatu, a public bus, which is basically a Volkswagen minibus that you cram as many people into as you can. So we had 17 in our minibus, the 5 of us, all our suitcases, and 12 of our closest friends that we just met, and took that at about 80 miles an hour for one stretch of the trip. And then someone met us from Nairobi and took us probably 100 miles an hour on these curvy, like cliffside roads. And we made it to the airport 5 minutes before our flight took off.
Wow.
Where did they stick all the luggage then?
How long was the flight, and if you all was just straight from here to Kenya or
So I flew out of, I think, Philadelphia, or one of the connecting airports. It was about 7.5 hours to London, and then about 8.5 hours to Nairobi from London. So it was a long flight, but broken up all right. I watched a lot of movies. We just took American and British Airlines, but a lot of the Middle Eastern airlines fly to Africa too, Emirates and Qatar Airlines. I kind of wanted that like swanky treatment that you get on those airlines, but British was fine.
You want to talk about your Maasai guides that were always with you?
Sure, yeah. So we had a Maasai guide who was with us at the camp, Koros, and he always dressed in traditional Maasai garb. He took us out on walks early in the morning, and he could identify any animal. Like, you would have no idea there was even an animal in your field of vision. He'd say, oh, look, a crown crane, like 3 miles over that way. Look at the zebras. There was not a single thing we pointed out to him that he could not identify. Plants, animals, birds circling overhead. And we got to do some Maasai weapons training with them. I didn't put in any of those pictures. They're less flattering, but we learned how to throw a kanga, which kind of looks like a femur bone. That's probably where it originated, but now they're carved out of wood. So you use that. Most of their weapons were just to defend their herds of cattle and goats from large animals. So the kanga you throw, and we could throw ours about 10 feet, and they threw theirs so far we had trouble finding them. Also bow and arrow, we worked on shooting that, and then they also used spears, although they didn't let us try spear throwing.
And teach them 2 Swahili words, the 2 best.
So some Swahili lessons for you. So hello is Jambo, Jambo. Swahili is a very phonetic language. It's probably the easiest African language for English speakers to learn. We learned quite a bit while we were there. People were always impressed. And as we were driving, we had a Land Cruiser with open sides. And whenever kids would see us on the road, they'd go, Jambo! And it was the cutest thing. We never got tired of that. So Jambo is hello. I talked about asante is thank you. And then one of my personal favorites is sawa sawa, which basically means it's okay, it's all good, or we're done here. It means a lot of different things, but you can ask somebody sawa, sawa. So that was that one. So it's very useful in every circumstance, and I continue saying it here, even though no one knows what it means.
Oh, you said the churches, and so what else like?
They were nowhere near as fancy as the churches that we had
But
here.
they're like all the different denominations, or just one, or?
I think it was about 50-50 Catholic and Protestant. And they had, I'm trying to remember the different denominations. There were some Baptist, I'm not sure what all of them were, maybe some non-denominational. But they tended to be pretty open air, similar to the way our hospital was that you saw. And just, you know, a sheet metal roof and maybe stone or mud sides, nothing fancy. We didn't get to go to the churches. I would have liked to though, but most people there did.
Did you guys have service with the children help? Did you participate in that outside, or was that an intern kind of thing?
We didn't get to interact with the kids too much. Normally, we would go get to visit one of the girls' schools and talk about careers in healthcare and health and those kinds of things. But the schools there, they go all year, but they have several long vacations, and we happened to be there during one of their long vacations in April, so we didn't get to go to the schools. So our community outreach day was our main day, getting to interact with kids and just examining them. And you know, the second they laid eyes on us, probably the first white people they'd ever seen, they just started sobbing, and we didn't get a lot of positive interactions with the kids. I mean, same as here, kids are never happy to be at the doctor's office. You get close to them with your big smile.
What was your temperature?
So the temperature in the Masai Mara was really comfortable, mid-70s, 50s at night. Once we got to the beach, it was more around high 80s to 90, but there was always the sea breeze. It's what you expect on a tropical beach. But the climate in Kenya is really varied, from the highlands in the north, which are in a drought right now, to the area where we were, which had a lot of serious flooding after we left. And there are forested areas, there are grasslands, there are desert areas, there are tropical areas. Kenya is about the size of Texas, for your reference. It's hard to tell. Africa always looks smaller on world maps, but it's big.
Is there much tourism?
There was a lot of tourism in the Masai Mara, in that reserve, when we were on our safari, and in Nairobi, the main city, and in the beach where we were. But in the rural areas where we spent most of our time, tourists don't really come there. It was mostly local people. We needed a lot of translation. Most of the people there didn't speak English.
Did you have any scary moments? I mean, besides driving outside and stuff like that? I mean, you know, like you're out there with these wild animals, and you know.
They kept us so safe. I think it's usually high schoolers who go on these trips, so they were kept a watchful eye on us. We always had our guide with us and the driver. And the camp where we stayed was guarded 24/7. So I never felt unsafe. Thankfully.
Is there much political strife in the country?
There is some. I'm not well versed on it. I was trying to read up on Wikipedia so I could answer any questions. In 2007, there was a lot of electoral strife. There was a lot of violence following the elections, even some considered war crimes by the leaders. But there have recently been some constitutional amendments where they say, okay, the elections are pretty free and fair right now, but they warned us about protests when we were there. I'm not sure what the protests were about at the time, but they said be careful in Nairobi, stay away from protesters. But I don't know too many of the political details there. Thank you all so much for listening.